Recording.
So let's begin this evening's open house with our first speaker, TriMet's own General Manager, Mr. Doug Kelsey. Doug?
Trying to get off mute here. There we go. I'm off mute. Well, thank you, Clay, and good evening, and hello to everybody. Thank you for joining us in your valuable time for this virtual budget meeting tonight to discuss specifically our 2021 budget. As some of you know, I'm Doug Kelsey. I'm the General Manager here at TriMet. And I would like to also acknowledge here this evening, two of our board of directors are participating tonight, listening in. First, very grateful to have President of the board, Bruce Warner, and Director Linda Simmons will be joining us shortly. She's a little bit tied up on another commitment, but she did send me a note that she is definitely going to be coming. So welcome to both of you. Tonight, you're going to be hearing from our panel of a number of internal leaders in our company about our budget revisions and specifically also around the impacts of the CARES Act funds that came from the federal government stimulus program and how we also plan to restore service gradually and also talk about ongoing safety security concerns and as well as impacts to our communities of concern currently. As Clay's indicated, make sure you write down your questions. We don't want to lose them, and we'll hopefully get to as many as we can live tonight. And if we can't, we'll make sure we get to you offline as well, because your questions are important for us. But that will be at the end, as Clay's already indicated. Clearly, in an ideal world, we would be doing this in person, but unfortunately, because of the COVID environment that we all live in, we're going to have to do the next best thing, and that's through WebEx or Zoom or tonight, wherever technology is available. So we would rather be meeting in person and continuing at the same time our largest our expansion program in, frankly, TriMet's history, but that includes frequent service lines, and train cars, expansion of many other services to come. So, but we live in an adjusting time, and we're going to have to adjust. On top of that, what we still continue to do is still trying to make our service faster and more reliable in living within the financial envelope that we do have today. But clearly, I don't think I have to tell anybody on this call that we are not living in normal times. And in fact, I would suggest this is the new abnormal. But every day is a new surprise, and we need to be very nimble today, individually and corporately. And TriMet, I think, has a long history of doing just that. And we will be successful through this at the end of the day, but it's going to take all of us to do that. We are working together through our trying time. We are focusing on some key areas, though, I'll call strategic principles from my perspective. First is preserving and maintaining service to the degree that we financially can, preserving jobs at TriMet here, and also promoting safety. Underpinning with that is also ensuring that we maintain critical financial flexibility. I think you'll hear this come up as to what that really means, is having the nimbleness to deploy where we need to, particularly not knowing all the assumptions that we, like your household budget, you build your plans on. We're in the most dynamic time probably of many of our own careers. However, before we get into the specific budget discussion, I really do want to address the recent protests and particularly the events that spurred them on. All of us at TriMet, we also share the anger, the frustration, and the pain even that's being felt across the nation, not only at the national level, but at the state level and the region from which we live in. The recent tragic and senseless deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tatiana Jefferson, just naming a few. This shouldn't be the last of a list. This should be the most recent of a list. This needs to be the last of a list of these tragedies. And I must say, even when I turn on different clips at night, when I watch the news, and there's other ones that emerge, and it's just gut wrenching watching these, as I'm sure you're experiencing too. It makes no sense, and it has to stop. While the protests here locally, though, have disrupted our service, and we apologize for that, and some of our individuals have chosen to damage our city, these acts should not eclipse the call for change. We should also remain focused on the message of those who are legitimately and peacefully protesting. They need to be welcomed, exercising their fundamental rights here. We also know we can't ignore anymore the blatant acts that have magnifying disparate treatment, systemic racism, acts of hate, discrimination, and violence. At TriMet, we definitely condemn these behaviors, whether it be deliberate, veiled, explicit, or indirect. It's just not acceptable. We also hold fast to our commitment to diversity, to equity, and inclusion within the agency and also our service practices every day. Our top priority, and it's thanks to the board of directors, including safety in both our vision, mission, and our values. That is not a normal occurrence. So safety is our number one priority for our customers and our employees. And also that means including being safe from racial or other biases. We have a lot to be proud of, but we also have a lot of work to do. We are open, TriMet is open to exploring new approaches of providing safety and security on our system. That's an important time. We've also made a number of changes to make to the system to make it more equitable and accessible. Let me give you a few examples. We've implemented a low-income fare now with more than 30,000 people enrolled. That's impressive. We're the only transit agency in North America to do an outside audit of our fare enforcement outcomes. In fact, we've done it twice. We changed state law and lowered fare fines for failures to pay fare. We're also exploring partnerships with the City of Portland on street response teams. We've added security trained in non-conventional and de-escalation techniques. And we removed officers from direct involvement in fare enforcement. And in fact, in some cases, we've just removed officers that should not be performing their duties on the system who report into other police jurisdictions. The expiration of our current police management contract is actually a natural time now to review the structure and management of law enforcement on the transit system. The current contract, as you may be aware, that some of it's been published in the media recently, expires at the end of this calendar year, being December. So we're going to use that intervening time to explore a number of options for meeting the agency's goal of ensuring an environment that's safe and secure, yes, and free from racial and other biases. We also look to our leaders of color within our agency and within our community as we continue to listen even more and offer our support and let them know that we stand with our community as we work to identify the problems and sincerely work to solve them, also in pragmatic ways. Now, we're here today to talk about our upcoming fiscal 21 budget. I'm also joined by a great team. Some of you may be able to see on your screen. If you can't, you can at least hear them. And they're going to be sharing information on different key topics here today, the key aspects of our budgets and recommendations, and also around our recovery efforts. But before I turn it over to them, I want to quickly share how TriMet has been impacted specifically by COVID-19, because that really shapes our discussion, and let alone the economic impacts that have been triggered by COVID-19. If we go back and look just back to February, which seems years ago now, just before the virus hit our area, our ridership was strong, contrary to the public and historical narrative that ridership at TriMet continues to decline. That's actually not true. So, for example, we have been up more than 6% over the previous year, and our bus ridership saw its 11th straight month of growth. On March 1st, we also rolled out our spring service improvements with two new frequent service bus lines. That also included other improvements to help the buses move faster and also increasingly through congested streets. Then on March 23rd, after Governor Brown issued the important stay-at-home orders, our ridership dipped about 30% initially, and now by as much as 70% as the pandemic reached its peak in our part of the world. We've been generally tracking around 67, two-thirds down now, with a slight increase. Others will talk about that later, though. But also with it, as we all know, that also brought an immediate loss in our fare revenue, and a significant loss. And as the pandemic caused painful job losses and continues to take its toll on the economy, which we are far from it being over, it signaled a much less payroll tax revenue, our largest source of revenue that TriMet needs to provide the services and provide employment for everybody. This will likely continue, and I think you can only have to reference the governor's May 20th forecast report and encourage you to have a look at that as one of the early glimpses into what's ahead for us all, literally some years to come. As an essential service, TriMet's very much continued to roll through this pandemic, recession or not. And despite all this, and just from a recent poll that was conducted by Metro, I'm pleased to let you know that, in fact, with all the challenges that TriMet faces, the public has acknowledged us by giving us a 71% positive poll favorability rating, the highest of all government agencies, including the federal government, within this region. So we're very pleased with that, but we have a lot of work to do. That's not what we think, that's what you think. But while our service has never stopped, it also has taken hard turns and is looking dramatically different today. So let me give you a couple examples of that. We made immediate changes to meet the CDC and state guidelines. We've temporarily reduced service by about 20% overall. And we worked hard to continue our service, especially to healthcare facilities and areas with higher numbers of transit-dependent riders who would need to connect with service or essential jobs. We've really tried to minimize the impact, and you'll hear about this a little later from Tom Mills, on keeping the routes intact as much as possible. But we're not out of this yet. Our service and our costs of the enhanced sanitizing and cleaning efforts are ongoing, and yet our ridership is still very low. We do remain very hopeful, though. Must plan pragmatically and practically to preserve the jobs and service for the recovery. And again, to maintain the financial flexibility to adapt to the assumptions of revenues and expenses. The expenses we have some more control on. Revenues are by how much our users, the employer payroll tax, and other sources. Again, Dee Brookshire will talk about that a little bit later. While COVID-19 changed nearly every aspect of our operations and our services, we've been able to maintain forward momentum on very important projects. So let me give you a couple examples. First, Division Transit Project, it's now under construction. And we just learned, in fact, from a tweet directly from the President of the United States about a week ago, awarding TriMet $99.9 million for federal funding to get to what we call a better red, or the Max Line extension and improvement to Fairplex, fixing some of the, I call aerial spaghetti of the tracks around Gateway and double tracking to the airport. That will, in fact, help speed up all the network as all the trains cross the steel bridge. They're all interrelated. Now, the note I should comment here, for the red line, these funds are not able, they're tied specifically to this project, and they're not able to be reallocated to any other project at all. And we do have a lot of technical hoops to get through, so it's not totally done, but we're very optimistic we're going to get the funding, and it's basically ours to lose. So we're very excited about this and hope to be in the ground on the spring. Next up is we'll also be making really important repairs to the steel bridge. This will be our largest, probably in our history, state of good repair while we run the system project. In fact, the steel bridge on the rail side is going to be shut down for the whole month of August. The cost of it is about $20 million. So stay tuned for a lot of messaging on that, but it's an investment in safety and resilience, and all these things bring really important jobs to the region, particularly at a critical time. And the final one I'll mention tonight is the Southwest Corridor. We continue to move forward on the long-term planning, the long-term efforts and partnerships in the regions that fits into the 2040 vision the region has accepted, yes, for the Southwest Corridor Light Rail Project. So knowing some of this background of what the projects we continue on, our current state, and how we are going to play, our budget, which we'll take to the TriMet board at the latter part of June, will be effective July 1st. Again, I want to reiterate the guiding principles for me as the general manager are to preserve service based on demand, preserve jobs, ensure safety under all circumstances, and ensure financial flexibility. That is the corner post of which we are built our budget for this next fiscal year on. As many of you know, because you work with them, I'm so blessed to have a really valuable team working at a fever pitch for the last few months to bring us to the point we are today. It was only back in March, about a week or so before COVID hit, at the end of March, that we introduced to the public and to the board our intended budget under the old conditions. Well, those are all by the wayside now, and the finance team has done an amazing job here at TriMet, literally recasting the budget within the time frame available. So I really want to tip my hat to Dee Brookshire, our CFO and head of financial administration for our organization, and their whole team have been working, I call burning the midnight oil, as we know. You're also going to hear, if you hear an update on the finances from Dee, then we're going to move to talking about the rest of the gradual restoration of service from our Director of Planning and Policy, Tom Mills. Thirdly, to be followed by John Gardner, Director of Equity, Transit, Inclusion, and Community Affairs, talk about impacts to the communities of concern. And fourthly, before we get to questions for you, the all-important questions for you, is also from Marla Blagg, our Executive Director of Safety and Security, on the investments we're making for cleaning procedures, personnel, and technology. So Dee, now enough of my talking. Let me turn it over to you to walk through the key important FY21 budget overview.
Thank you, Doug, and good evening, everyone. I'd like to talk to you about the budget, and Doug has already talked quite a bit about it. So next slide, please. Play. There we go. Okay, so just a little bit of activity on the budget. The board approved the proposed fiscal year 2021 budget and released it to the public and to the Tax Supervising Conservation Committee, or the TSCC, to review for the public hearing that was scheduled for April of 2020. The approved fiscal year 21 budget, as Doug mentioned, anticipated another year of robust growth and service improvements. All of the trajectories were going up. And then, of course, COVID-19 and the governor's stay-at-home order changed everything. The entire budget had to be reworked. It's probably worth saying here that staff had spent 3 months preparing the budget, and we've reworked it in a few weeks, in a matter of a month. So what we had to do was push back while we were trying to monitor the changing conditions. Things were changing very quickly. We were able to push the TSCC public hearing from April to May, and the date for adoption of the fiscal 21 budget from May to June. Next slide, please. So to prepare for the inevitable revenue reductions, the general manager met with each executive director to determine the cuts in both the operating and capital budgets for the rest of fiscal year 2020 and the approvals for fiscal year 2021. We still had a quarter to go in fiscal year 2020 when we began to reevaluate the expenditure levels for both the current year and the next year's budget. Planned expenditures, operating and capital projects that could be descoped, deferred, or canceled were determined, and the budgets were adjusted. Next slide, please. So we immediately undertook, as soon as this began, cost reduction measures. The general manager immediately initiated for the rest of fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2021 a hiring freeze on all but essential positions. Positions must now be approved by the general manager. Ban on non-essential out-of-town travel, also about 95% cut in travel, also with GM approval. Reduced increase to our regular O&M budgets of about 1%. Reduced service on bus and rail, approximately 20% on bus and 9% on rail without layoffs. Postponed an energy saving method that would have cost us more money. We have deferred that, changing to R99 fuel. And we've ordered no expanded service through fiscal year 2021, which you will hear more about from Tom in a minute. Next slide, please. So the numbers are that for the fiscal year 2020, that's the last 3 months of this current fiscal year, we had to figure out what the new endpoint would be for fiscal year 20 before we could actually develop the fiscal year 2021 revisions. We expected a number of impacts due to the pandemic, and this is what they were. We were expecting passenger fares to decline by 28.3 million. Tax revenues, payroll tax primarily, were expected to decline by 48 million. Federal CARES Act reimbursements did come in and were expected to be reimbursed at 59 million. Operating expense reductions were expected to be 21.3 million, and capital expense reductions are expected to be 2.8 million. So those changes will affect the beginning fund balance of the new fiscal 2021 budget, but it did give us a new starting point from which to rework the 2021 budget. Next slide, please. For fiscal year 2021, the next step was to roll forward the new ending fund balance from fiscal year 2020 and incorporate all known impacts to the fiscal year 2021 budget. The adjustments we made to the fiscal year 2021 approved budget that we are presenting for adoption include passenger fares, payroll tax, and other revenues have been reduced by $125.8 million. CARES Act reimbursements are expected to come in at $126 million. Operating expenditures were reduced, but were added back because for COVID-19 related expenses, and so that one remains flat. The primary COVID expenses are in labor costs as well as all of the related PPE and cleaning supplies. Capital expenditures paid for with general funds increased by $18 million to pay for the Steel Bridge project. So just so people are a little bit confused about the CARES Act. CARES Act is not to replace lost revenue. The CARES Act reimbursements are to help us pay for things that we would have paid for with fair revenue, but we are actually submitting for expense reimbursements based on what we've actually spent on the crisis and more. Next slide, please. So finally, to give you a recap on what we're proposing for the board's consideration on June 24th for adoption is totals $1.64 billion. The day-to-day operating requirements total $732.8 million. That's $610.2 million for all system operating costs and $122.6 million for debt service. The capital improvement program totals $377.79 million. That includes all types of funds. It could be general fund or debt service proceeds, debt proceeds or grant funds. Pass-through funds, funding exchange payments, and special payments are $18.68 million. We have a contingency of $39.6 million and a total fund balance of $471.3 million. Of that, the unrestricted fund balance, that's our reserve of 2.25 months of operating costs, is $137.7 million. Just a word on the contingency and the reserve balance. Those are funds that are set according to our strategic financial plan guidelines. The contingency is set at 3% of the overall budget, and the reserve balance is set at 2.25 months of operating expenses. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Tom Mills, who is our Director of Mobility Planning and Policy, to talk about service restoration. Tom?
Thank you, Dee. Thanks everyone for coming out tonight and or logging in tonight and joining us for the open house. Clay, if I can ask you to move to the next slide. Thank you. Well, as both Dee and Doug have talked about, the governor's announcement and order to stay home has had a significant impact on TriMet. The two primary impacts were a big decrease in our riders, which has resulted in a significant decrease in fare revenue, as well as what we expect to be a large decrease in payroll tax collection as a result of the high unemployment numbers. What this means for us is less revenue, and revenue is what we use to operate the bus, MAX, and West system. Fare revenue, of course, comes in at about 17% of our budget, and so we are immediately feeling that. The payroll tax revenue collections, we don't know exactly yet what that's going to be. As Dee had mentioned, we are projecting, but we still are going to see what that is, but we know that that's going to be significant. Next slide, please. So in response and in expectation for significant reductions in revenue, we did make the decision to reduce bus, MAX, and West service. We reduced service by approximately 20%. Our priority when making decisions about how to reduce the service was to preserve the network as much as possible. And in nearly all cases, we were successful. All the bus lines that existed prior to the pandemic are still in existence with the exception of one bus line. That was bus line 272, the PDX night bus. That was the bus line that ran ran to the airport late at night between approximately 2 in the morning and 4:30 in the morning. Even prior to the pandemic, we were not getting a lot of ridership. But once the pandemic hit and the airport started, cutting back on flights, and fewer people were traveling to and from Portland via the airport, we really saw a drop in rides, and so it became clear that we could no longer sustain that service. Additionally, we did also eliminate the overnight service on lines 20 Burnside Stark and line 57 TV Highway. Those lines still exist. Those lines are still frequent service lines. They still run late at night, but they just don't run all night long like they did previously. Additionally, we made it a priority to preserve service to 3 areas, weekday service that is. Those are service in equity communities, because we know that people who live in low-income communities and people of color are more likely to continue riding. And so we wanted to make sure that they still had enough service so that they could social distance. In fact, you see here on the screen an article about in other parts of the country, this one in Boston, where they kind of equally cut the service across the board, and that had a greater impact on low-income riders and their exposure to COVID-19. We chose not to do that. We chose to maintain service in those communities. Additionally, we, as much as possible, have maintained service to the hospitals, so essential workers can get to the hospital, as well as to job centers. Again, essential workers are trying to get to a lot of these job centers. A great example is the Amazon facility in Troutdale, where in fact ridership has not dropped at all. Ridership has we've actually had to add service to maintain social distancing. Lastly, we made the decision to suspend our plans for service expansion in FY21. We've really been on a roll the last few years with expanding service, but given the situation, it just didn't make sense to try to expand service in one part of town while at the same time cutting in other parts of town. So that is on hold, hopefully for just a year. Next slide, please. And already we are starting to think about restoration of service. There are three factors that we're going to continue to keep an eye on that will guide us in how and when we restore service. The first, of course, is as finances allow. Hopefully we've experienced the worst of it all. Hopefully employment starts coming back up and our fare revenue continues to come back up, and we can start restoring. Additionally, we'll be looking at ridership increases. Ridership is already starting to tick up slightly, but if that trend continues, it means that we'll need to restore service in order to continue to meet the demand. And then lastly, we'll continue to keep an eye on how we are able to maintain our safety and maintenance standards while under these new circumstances. Of course, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know the future. So I would love to be able to give you a timeline. I would love to tell you in fall, we're going to restore service by this much, or by December, we'll restore service this much. But we just don't know. We don't know if there'll be another peak or another wave. And so we're just going to have to be in a wait and see mode, try to be nimble, and try to restore service as those 3 standards are met. Next slide, please. However, when we do restore service, we hope to do that incrementally, and we hope to do that in 3 steps. The first step will be, I mentioned earlier that we had cut service by about 20%. of where we were in February. So, so we're currently operating at an 80% level. So the first step will be to upgrade that service from 80% of the February levels to the 90% of where we were in February. And when we do that, we will focus those improvements on low-income communities and communities of color. The next step will be to go from 90% of pre-COVID levels to 95% of pre-COVID levels. Again, we're going to focus those improvements on low-income communities and communities of colors if there are any lines that we haven't upgraded back to where they were before. And then we will also focus on high ridership routes into downtown Portland. Those are the routes that experience the most crowding on a regular basis. We expect at that point downtown Portland will be open, and we will need to have additional service on those lines to meet the crowding, especially if social distancing is still something that we want to achieve. And then lastly, we will be restoring service. Our third step will be from the 95% level to the 100% level. However, we're going to use this opportunity to evaluate some of our low-performing routes and decide whether they need to be restored all the way to where they were before, or whether they should stay where they are, and then reallocate some of the service hours and put those on lines where we need more service because of overcrowding and the need for social distancing. Next slide, please. And service expansion. As I mentioned, we were really on a roll there for several years, expanding the service. We're very proud of it. It was really a great time for us, and we look forward to getting back to it. So we hope once we have restored service back to the 100% level, we hope to resume our service expansion. So we'll continue to monitor ridership demand and finances in fiscal years 21 and 22. And hopefully by the end of 22, we will be back in the service expansion mode. However, we are still committed to certain improvements that are already underway. The first, of course, is our service improvements related to the Division Transit Project. As Doug mentioned, Division Transit Project is still moving forward. With that project, there was going to be some service improvements to other bus lines that connect to it. We still have every intention of making those service improvements when the project opens in September of 2022. Additionally, Doug had mentioned the Better Red project. Again, that will be under construction. When that opens in 2024, we are committed to making the service improvements to allow that to occur. And that includes the expansion of Red Line to Hillsborough. Finally, in regards to West Commuter Rail, we will be evaluating that separately. West Commuter Rail has been challenged since its beginning to meet its ridership projections, and now is a good time to continue to monitor that and really consider whether that is restored back to the level it was before or to a level that is more right-sized to the demand. And that will be our approach for service restoration in the coming years. Now I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce John Gardner. John is our Director of Transit Equity, Inclusion, and Community Affairs. John will talk about how communities of concern were considered as part of our budget process. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Good evening, everyone. Tonight I'm going to speak briefly about some of the initiatives, programs, and efforts that this year's proposed budget supports through my department. Next slide. Like many other public agencies, TriMet is committed to minimizing budget impacts to low-income and minority communities. So first, I will give a brief overview of our efforts, followed by more details across some of the larger areas of action. Our focus in the year ahead is to ensure that we are using an equity lens to help inform service planning decisions. We are doing this by using our nationally recognized civil rights and Title VI program to help analyze and inform our decisions around service changes and to guard against any disparate impacts for communities of color or disproportionate burdens for low-income riders. We will also continue to spread the news and increase around our low-income fare program, which is currently partnering with over 50 locations and community-based sites around the region. We have even added the ability to enroll eligible riders online, and we expect to grow the program in the year ahead despite the COVID pandemic. In addition to TriMet's reduced fares, we are also excited to support the current efforts led by Metro that may bring even more resources to the region in supporting free fares for high school age students and others through a regional funding measure. This year's budget also supports TriMet's ability to continue to work towards increasing our equitable contracting outcome to ensure there are opportunities for historically underrepresented minority contractors to help us build out the region's public transit system. Finally, TriMet is looking for even more ways to connect to the community while we move into the second year of our work to build out our language access efforts for riders from limited English communities as part of our Title VI program. Next slide, please. So as I just mentioned, this year's budget continues to support discounted fare program initiatives. July will mark the third year of implementing the reduced fare program for low-income riders in partnership with a very large network of community-based organizations across the Tri-County area. As Doug said earlier, the program has been a huge success with already enrolling 30,000 individuals since it began. Riders who participate in the program can save up to 72% off the cost of their monthly fare. Our low-income fare program is similar to our Honored Citizen and Youth Program efforts. We can issue you a hop card, and you can use that personal card to get discounts on Max, West, buses, Portland Streetcar, C-Tran, all for $1.25 a trip, $2.50 for a day pass, or $28 a month. You can learn more about our low-income fare program and apply at trimet.org/lowincome. In addition to our reduced fare program efforts for individuals, we are also providing public transportation fare grants to community-based organizations through our Access Transit program. This year, we funded over 100 nonprofits and community-based organizations with grants that total over $1 million in free fares. And this initiative will continue in the year ahead. The coming year will also mark the second opportunity to provide free fare transit grants to high schools across the Tri-County area through resources from the Keep Oregon Moving legislation. This fall, we will provide a second round of resources through our Access Transit High School program to support low-income students with accessing the region's public transit system. Information for all of these programs can be found at trimet.org/accesstransit. Next slide, please. This budget also allows TriMet to continue its long history of leveraging federal dollars to improve the TriMet system for the long term while supporting our economic recovery in the near term. By putting contractors to work, especially women and minority businesses, as well as working to ensure that people of color and women are reflected in the project's workforce, we continue to live our values through our investments. The Division Transit Project, which is under construction now, will provide a new type of high-capacity bus service for faster, more reliable service between downtown Portland, Southeast, and East Portland and Gresham. This project will provide many benefits, including 20 new marked crosswalks and 4.5 miles of protected bike lanes. It will also create 1,400 new jobs. This project also represents Oregon's largest construction contract ever awarded to a minority contractor in the state's history, as the project is being led by Raymore Construction, a local African-American certified firm. Another opportunity to achieve equity through our building efforts is the Better Red project that Doug mentioned earlier, which was recently recommended for federal funding and could start construction next spring. This project extends the Red Line services across 10 stations and farther west into Hillsborough. It also fixes bottlenecks at PDX and Gateway, improving reliability on the entire system, and will also provide over 1,200 new jobs. And finally, the Southwest Corridor project, which is in development now. This project could provide an 11-mile expansion of the MAX system. This 11-mile expansion of the MAX system and expand access to education and jobs and create better connections to Portland State University, OHSU, PCC Sylvania, and improve two-way commutes to job centers in Tigard and Tualatin. The project is also supported by many community agencies who help create the Southwest Equitable Development Strategy, which brings a new focus on intentional efforts to minimize displacement, increase affordable housing, and create equitable economic opportunity. If this project moves forward, it could provide as much as 28,000 new jobs for the region. At TriMet, we are committed to ensuring equitable, inclusionary contracting across all of these projects, and our staff look forward to continuing to work with minority businesses, associations to help champion the participation necessary to grow the region in an inclusion fashion. We believe these investments into transit will support our region's economic recovery and get people where they need to go safely and affordably. Finally, these projects wouldn't be possible without a dedicated team of community affairs staff who consistently reach out and work with communities, neighborhood associations, and businesses to ensure that these stakeholders have a seat at the table and that they have a voice in the projects from conception through construction. Next slide. This ongoing project stakeholder engagement led by our community affairs team is just one example of the types of efforts we are investing in to ensure that our work is connected to, informed by, and led by the community. Every month through our Transit Equity Advisory Committee, we convene 16 community-based organizations to review and provide input across TriMet projects, services, and initiatives. We also work to convene quarterly safety and security subcommittee meetings, as well as a committee for accessible transportation, to ensure that we are keeping the needs of seniors and individuals with disabilities on the forefront of our service planning and paratransit services decisions. We recognize that all of these efforts require continuous improvement and feedback and focus. And in the year ahead, we plan on increasing our efforts to engage even more partners and our ridership as we look to build out a new racial equity lens tool that we will use to add more analysis, feedback, and information across our policy and decision-making processes and investments moving forward. In order to continue to better communicate our works and outcomes and current initiatives and partnerships, we have recently developed a new webpage where you can find information on all the programs and initiatives I've mentioned tonight, as well as a lot more. And that's at trimet.org/equity. Next slide. As I end my presentation, I want to just say that this kind of work takes a lot of external support from our community partners and hard work from our dedicated team of internal staff. I'm blessed to work with great leaders and their staff across many areas of focus. So in addition to any questions you may have for me tonight, I also invite you to reach out directly for any additional information about our programs with our department leads as you see fit. Thank you all again. Next, I have the pleasure to introduce Marla Blagg, TriMet's Executive Director of Safety and Security, to provide a COVID-19 update.
Great, thank you, John. I greatly appreciate that. Again, I'm Marla Blagg. I'm the Safety and Security Executive Director for TriMet. And tonight's presentation is going to be on COVID-19 and the efforts that we have taken to ensure that our systems are put in place to keep you safe aboard our buses and trains. Next slide. As we have made our way through this pandemic, we have been following all of the guidance from Governor Brown, the Oregon Health Authority, and our county public health partners. We are an essential service, therefore we did continue to run through the COVID crisis. We have made immediate changes to meet the various health guidelines, and we have worked hard to ensure the service is continued, especially to healthcare facilities, and areas with higher numbers of transit-dependent riders who need to connect with services or essential jobs. Next slide, please. First and foremost, we have elevated our cleaning procedures, sanitizing surfaces on our vehicles and across the system, in many cases multiple times a day. With these efforts, we intend to sustain and continue to improve them with a very ambitious goal of cleaning our buses every 4 hours. We have adopted new technologies, including purchasing 36 foggers that use a safe hydrogen peroxide solution to disinfect every nook and cranny of the bus. We have also hired 30 new service workers to help with cleaning, and we will be bringing another 124 cleaners on board, which is a new position for us, again, to ensure that our system is safe for all of those who use it. And lastly, one of the other new technologies that we are using is we are testing ultraviolet light. We hope this will help in our efforts to keep our vehicles sanitized. Next slide. If anybody has ridden our system recently, you will see that mask and face coverings are now required to ride. And we are strongly encouraged to maintain a safe distance, whether you are a customer, an employee, a vendor, or contractor. We've purchased millions of disposable masks and one of the first transit agencies in the nation to install mask dispensers on board our buses and trains so that everyone who rides can take safe precautions while they're riding our system. We're also installing hand sanitizer dispensers on all of our vehicles, which totals more than 1,100 when you include bus, MAX, West, and Lyft, our paratransit. Behind the scenes, our team has worked tirelessly to step up and do whatever is asked of them to keep our service and system safe. Next slide. If you've ridden TriMet recently, you will know that we've taken great strides to promote physical distancing while you're at a stop or a station or on board. Riders should stay a safe distance from each other. On the bus, we've added a second yellow line that's near the priority seating area. Riders should stay behind this line when the bus is in motion. It's there to help operators practice physical distancing while they're driving. We've also implemented new seat layouts on our vehicles to help promote social distancing on board. And don't forget, when you even don't see the cues or signs, it's always good to maintain that physical distance from the others. Next slide. And finally, one of our last changes that we have, or that you will see, more and more of our buses will have the plastic protective operator safety panel. This is between our riders and our bus operators. At the start of 2020, about half of our buses had those safety panels. We are now investing to add the protective barriers to the rest of our fleet as extra safety protection for our operators. They should all be installed by early summer. I would also note that when further guidance comes out from the health officials, we will respond quickly and adapt to ensure that our riders and our employees are always safe. And Doug, that concludes my update.
All right, thank you, Marla, for that update. I really appreciate that. Now it's time for us to take your questions. We do have questions come in, but if there are more questions, we would like to have you enter them into the chat box. Just enter it into the chat box on your screen. If you wouldn't mind telling me who you'd like to direct your question to, I'd appreciate that. That way we can accommodate as many questions as possible at our time tonight. If you have further comments, you can send them to comments@trimet.org. Let's start with the first question. And the question is, the current COVID-19 crisis has created budget uncertainty for all organizations. We wonder why TriMet can't use COVID relief funding from the federal government to fund TriMet services to eliminate the need to reduce the general fund revenue going to community-based transportation programs. John, that might be a good one for you.
I think that actually might be more of a Tom question, if I understand what they're asking about. Using CARES funds as a pass-through, is that to?
I think, yeah, I'll jump in and actually I'm going to then pass it over to Dee, I think, because Dee has a little bit more experience with or knowledge about the CARES fund. I think what that's referring to is we are reducing some of the support that we are proposing in our budget to reduce some of the support that we give to Ride Connection, a community-based organization. I do want to say that Ride Connection is a great partner, and we've worked with them for over 20 years and plan to continue working with TriMet into the future. However, Ride Connection is experiencing a similar situation as we are in that their ridership is down. We provide funding to pay for rides, and so if they are projecting fewer rides, then there's a need for less funding, and then that is funding that we can use to support our system. As Dee had pointed out, We have a challenging budget ahead of us. And so if funds are not going to be used on rides with community-based transportation, then we will use that to support us. I've been in touch quite a bit with Ride Connection on this topic, and we're working as closely as we can to continue supporting them. Dee, would you like to address the CARES Act portion of that question? I'm not knowledgeable enough about CARES.
We are very limited on how well, first of all, let me back up. The distribution of CARES Act funding was based on FTA's urbanized area formula for formula funds. And so only the folks that were recipients of 5307 actually received funding through the CARES Act. We were the primary recipient in the UZA we belong to, but we also sent a share to CTRAN and in Vancouver, and also to SMART in Wilsonville. So there are other entities that have requested funding from us, but we actually don't have the ability to send it to them. They would have to apply to FTA for funding directly.
I might it's Doug. I might add into this conversation here. So I guess from my perspective, when I used the terms earlier on, financial flexibility. So my recollection, Dee will correct me very quickly, as she always does when I'm wrong. We give them, between the federal grants and our operating budget combined, we fund specifically to the Ride Connection conversation. By the way, a great partner, a great partner, does great service here. We give them about $2.5 million generally. So we have reduced that for the time being down by about $500,000. So the net of it is about an 18% reduction. And so we're doing that because that's actually less than what the rest of the transit system's actually been cut back by right now. So what we want to do is maintain financial flexibility. I don't think any of us know how much ridership is actually coming back and when. So how much and when also fits into how much money might be needed to support an important service. So we also don't want to put it into the contract, because once it's locked into that contract, that money is locked, when in fact we don't know. So we want to retain the flexibility. We're going to monitor it, we're going to watch it, and we'll see how the economy does and how it responds. So it continues to be a very important service for us, but even Ride Connection is part of this total service challenge that we're all going through right now. So nobody's exempt, but we are very much monitoring this. And you can see even in the budget numbers that Dee went through, we have an increased amount of contingency. And it's for things like that we're going to have to monitor as we understand the severity of the reality of our financial assumptions for employer payroll tax, for fair recovery, etc. So it's preserving that financial nimbleness, of which Ride Connection is part of the important service palette that we provide to the community.
Thank you, everybody, for those responses. And so our next question is, do police check fares? I assume they're talking about Portland police. If so, can you agree that they shouldn't be fare enforcers?
I'd be happy to answer that question. Our Portland police officers at our Transit Police Division do not check fares. We have a cadre of trained staff that are fare inspectors that not only check fare, but they also check for code compliance. And so while you may see transit police present during fare inspections, they physically do not check the fare. They're there to help support our team and provide a safe environment for our employees to work in.
Thank you, Marla. I appreciate that. And so our next question is, will it still be fairly seamless between TriMet and Clark County's CTRAN? Oh, that's probably a good question for you.
Is that Tom you're referring to answer that one, Clay?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I just didn't hear the name.
Thank you, Clay. Yes. I'm not entirely sure about the question if they're referring to the hop card or if they're referring to transfers between the two. But in terms of the hop card, absolutely, the hop card will still be accepted by CTRAN and TriMet, as well as Portland Streetcar. You know, in terms of transfers, have we been able to preserve all the connections? I would say probably we haven't. There probably are maybe a few longer waits between transferring between CTRAN and TriMet. However, I would say that the majority of the time when you are transferring to CTRAN, you are transferring off a MAX line onto CTRAN. Otherwise, the CTRAN buses go straight into downtown. And so, you know, because MAX is oftentimes some of our highest service, I think that even if your wait is longer, it is probably not significantly longer than what it was previously.
Thank you, Tom. And this next question, I think, would be also one for you as well. The question is, you've talked a lot about expansion of services in the greater metro area. What about the rural areas with little or no TriMet routes? We have all lost riders and rides, and your budget is based on the potential for growth. You're not allowing or respecting the rural need. So basically, they're asking about what about more service in the rural areas.
I'll go ahead and take that. So TriMet has a district within which we provide service. That district is largely urbanized. Even suburban areas, we would say, are urbanized. Most of the rural areas in the region are outside the TriMet district, and we are not legally allowed to provide service to those areas. There are a couple exceptions, one of which would be, say, Estacada, in which we do travel through forest land to get to Estacada. But we do serve Estacada, and we have stops in between. That is not what we would refer to as a high ridership bus route, and that is reasonably, you know, you would expect that because we are serving, going through an area that is forest in many cases. But we do provide that service. I would also like to point out that in 2017, the state passed the Keep Oregon Moving, was it Keep Oregon Moving Act, HB 2017, and that you know, that is an income tax that we all pay, those of us who work, and that even those outside the TriMet district are paying that tax. And what happens with that money is it goes to the individual counties, and those counties are using those funds to start up and preserve rural transit systems. So there is service out to the rural areas now more than ever, actually, and that is supported through that HB 2017 funding.
Thank you, Tom. And so our next question might be a good one for Doug. The question is, do TriMet's leaders support the proposed Frog Ferry? That's F-R-O-G. I very much do, especially in these pandemic days with everyone extremely nervous about getting inside crowded buses. And the Frog Ferry ride is way less than almost anyone believes. So basically what they're asking about is the Frog Ferry, I think, is the water shuttle, the Willamette and Columbia. Is that something that TriMet supports?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to speak to this one. So let me give you, I have a bit of background. Before I moved down here from Vancouver, British Columbia, I oversaw the Marine Division also up in TransLink in Vancouver. So I've closed ferry operations and I've opened them, river and ocean. So this is an interesting topic. I think part of what we have to look at is what is the prize? In terms of anytime you're moving marine through water, there has to be a significant time savings, typically, because particularly on rivers, at some point you're either crossing the river or you're going against it and such. So you also have, depends what the cost is. You're also dealing with docks and marine environmental issues. They can get really costly very quickly. So I really look at the price of it. So for example, and also what's the long-term alternatives that you have to compete against. So for me, it's a water bus, if you will. So It's just like it's another mobility tool. I think we should be receptive to those, but I think they're going to have to earn the right in performance and investment over time. Particularly in today's environment, it's going to be really challenging. So the higher the price, the lower the cost, the greater advantage of running time. I think that moves you to the zone of interest. But there typically is a lot higher cost structure associated with running marine.
Thank you.
Clay, can I just jump on that real quick also? So we have been working with Friends of Frog Ferry, the organization that is sponsoring that project. Friends of Frog Ferry and TriMet partnered to get a state grant to do a study, both a finance plan and an operational plan. And that will also include kind of refined ridership projections on that. The City of Portland, I want to give the City of Portland kudos. They are providing the match to that grant. It's going to the city's city council, I think, in the next week or two to approve that that match. And once that does, the study can get started, and we'll know more. We just don't know that much right now, and so we'll continue to work with Friends of Frog Ferry to learn more about the feasibility of ferry service in the region.
Yeah, and I think to this, I think a lot of times rail is the same way. It's very emotional, where it's you grab a map and you put it on the map. A lot of times you have to look at demand first, and then you figure out what's the right alternative. So if you leave with supply, you may end up with a supply solution. I think you look at demand first, figure out what that looks like, when and how, and then you look at the alternatives, yes, including marine, to get to what's the best price for in the most effective way for the short, medium, and longer term.
Wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate your responses. So the next question is, I'm from the Aging Services Advisory Council at Multnomah County. I'm concerned that the communities of concern did not include the many older riders who used fixed route and the MAX rather than paratransit. There have been problems in this community, both in finding them and seating on the bus, and confusion with the hop cart system. We just ask that we try and understand those issues to improve the performance as we eventually come back to normal. John, maybe you can respond to that.
Certainly, those are really good points, and I think TriMet shares the goal of making Portland an age city, and I think making sure that voice is not sort of overshadowed by louder, more active voices, a constant concern. That's part of our equity index when we look at the 10 factors in our service planning to ensure that seniors that are still taking the bus, their voice is considered. And we actually have a few folks on the Safety and Security Subcommittee to help with our ongoing planning and conversations. So I don't think that perspective is overlooked, and if anything, I'd invite that person to reach out to me directly after this town hall to give me some of their ideas on how to move forward better and more inclusively.
Terrific. Thank you, John. Our next question would probably be a good one for Marla. And the question is, can TriMet commit to support a bill in the state legislature that indicates that law enforcement should not participate in fare inspection?
You know, that is a really great question, and that's a policy question. So I'd actually like the general manager to talk about that. And we have been looking very large, broad-based look at the fare enforcement program, how we can make it better, how we can improve it. We've done large assessments on it, but the position that TriMet takes, I will let Doug respond.
Yeah, Clay, can you read the first part of the question? I think
Yeah.
I got the part, but I had trouble hearing the first.
You bet. So can TriMet commit to support a bill in the state legislature that indicates that law enforcement should not participate in fare inspection?
Yeah, I think my initial reaction is as Marla's already indicated, I think from the policing side, we already don't do that. So I'm okay with that. I think depends on what's the definition of the spectrum of law enforcement. We also have fare inspectors that have authorities and rights. So I do think there needs to be the capability of it. If it is referring to policing, then that's okay. If it's about someone needs to be able to do fare enforcement, we have a proof of payment system like most every country or most every city in the country does, unless you have a fare gate system on the rail, but those are usually the older systems. So it doesn't seem unreasonable for now, but I think the question is, what's the other part that's not that?
Thank you, Doug. And our next question is about the Lyft paratransit program. And what they're asking is the Lyft paratransit program mostly unchanged? I think they're referring to the service that they provide. Has it been impacted by service cuts?
Tom, if you want to talk to that first, then or do you want me to talk to it? I've got the other way.
I can jump in here real quick. So the answer to that question is that the Lyft paratransit service has not been negatively impacted by law. TriMet must provide complimentary paratransit service within 3/4 of a mile of all of our bus lines. Some of that availability kind of fluctuates depending on the level of service on the line, but we have not made that adjustment. So we're providing the trips to anyone who calls in for a paratransit trip as long as they're within that 3/4 of a mile boundary. And I would tell you that we have seen a significant decrease in the demand for paratransit service. So there's no capacity issue for us either. So yeah, we're there for those folks.
I might add to it, if I may, Clay. I think it's everything. We've not missed trips because of the I'll call budget cutbacks. In fact, what we are doing is actually taking some of our existing drivers. We kept 10 extra drivers on, more than we need, and we're using some of those drivers to actually do home deliveries now, because many of our very important customers who use Lyft, because of staying safe and staying home for all the right reasons, cannot get out. So we flipped this on its head a bit. And if someone needs a trip outside, of course, dialysis and other critical needs, we're doing that. But we're actually, while we can afford it for the time, it's not forever, is we're doing home deliveries right now on the paratransit side. In fact, even I'll extend that beyond paratransit. We're also doing Meals on Wheels, which in fact hits some paratransit customers, but also for the Meals on Wheels community throughout this region. We're using some of our existing really great our employees to deliver Meals on Wheels, who were all the volunteers left during the crisis. So that's an example how we're trying to do things slightly differently to help the community where we can financially, for as long as we can financially. Ridership or usership dropped by about 85%, if my recollection was right, from the start. It may be around 80% now, but generally it's still very low. But we'll expand it up as need be, not only for legal reasons, but because it's the right reason.
Thank you, Doug. And we don't have any other questions coming in, but we do have one comment, and that is about sign language. And this customer was saying that we hope that as part of the operator training that they could include some basic sign language for operators so they could communicate better with hearing impaired customers.
Great comment. Thank you. And, can I take that for a sec, Clay? Because I also want to comment. Last night we actually had a sign language service going on as well. So the community was aware of that, and I think that was quite an active discussion as part of that. So just so folks know, it wasn't tonight the service provided, but in fact it was at last night's town hall for that community, because that's part of accessibility, right? So
correct. We always provide that upon request. So thank you. And so if anybody else has any more questions from our attendees, please go ahead and use the chat box to send that to me, to Clay Thompson. And if there's any other questions, we can make sure that our panelists this evening have a chance to answer your questions when we have them all here as a group.
Clay, if I may,
Yes.
one of our participants suggested keeping the double line for the buses to maintain that safe distance even after COVID, because that adds a little bit more safety so we don't have people bunching up at the front doors. And I think that's a good idea. And when our capacity allows us to do that. We certainly don't want our operators being distracted while they're driving. So I just wanted to read that suggestion that one of our participants had.
Yes, was that the one about keeping the double line for keep passengers from not blocking the front door?
Yeah.
Okay, good, thank you.
And maybe just to add to that, I hope to keep even after, once we rid of this COVID-19, I hope to keep sanitizers on the bus and the trains just as a normal practice for this organization, just as good sanitization practices. So I'm not sure, hopefully we won't need the masks, but I think the 6-foot line suggestion is a great one, sanitizers. And please, if you have other ideas like that to help us, we know cleanliness is important, and that's why we're doubling down here at TriMet on it. Not sure because of TriMet, but we want not only you to use it, but to tell your friends and everybody else to be using the system as well. So all these ideas are really helpful to us. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Doug. We do have another question that came in, and this customer said, "I'm blind. Will face masks and hands be installed on buses and MAX trains?" And I think they're talking about hand sanitizers. So as a person who's sight impaired, was wondering if face masks and hand sanitizers will continue to be used on buses and MAX trains even after we get past the COVID concerns.
Yeah, and I think just building on what I tried to say, I'm expecting that for yes, buses and trains, we will continue with hand sanitizer in a post-COVID world, and we can't get there quick enough. The masks, I'm less sure that we'll actually need them, and I think that needs to be fit for the purpose of what we're trying to solve. So they're also they're very expensive when you buy millions of them in unit cost. So we're trying to balance the safety side, but I think the sanitizers makes a lot of good sense.
And Doug, maybe you can also say where they're located on the vehicle so that the customer would know.
Well, I'll comment on the bus one, and maybe Marla or someone else can help me on the trains. I think we're still working where that should be. On the bus, I had actually asked, as part of our team looking at this, to have them up at the front of the bus. So as people come up and use the smart card, then a mask is in close proximity before they head down the body of the bus amongst other customers, including our operators. And so somewhat proximity near the tap machine for HOP, at least within reaching distance, and the same thing for sanitizers. I'm not sure if Marla or someone else can comment on rail, because I think we're still working on the positioning there.
Yeah, I haven't heard the final details, but what we did do is we moved the hand sanitizers away from the entrances of the train because we didn't want people stopping and blocking the boarding. And we've placed them in the area that's close to the ADA seating so that all of our riders will have accessibility to the hand sanitizer.
Thank you, Marla. Yes, it seems
there
like
would be one clay on each train car.
Oh, good. Okay. Yes, and one customer was mentioning they hadn't seen any on the MAX train, so maybe it's just because they've been moved to more of a center portion of the train.
I do also know, I think they're looking for a permanent. Right now, we've got temporary mass structures out there. I know they're in construction. It's been awarded right now to get to a more permanent one. So I think we're still, frankly, probably fiddling and learning with it. If the customer has some ideas around its placement based on what Marla just said, if they can maybe email you and let's get them to the right people to, let's listen to what our customer has to say here is to help us.
Yeah. And in addition to that question about masks, what happens if all the masks are gone, as apparently has happened on the streetcar?
Well, then we do have a check-in process. So, and our operators need to let us know. We reload them each night. Look, it takes a village to run a large, complex system like this. If you know the train number, if you're out there, you see them out, text us to, so we can actually get it through our system. We have our normal practices for replenishment, including our operators advising us. I think we're probably seeing a run on some of them, frankly, because some of the dispensers right now, you can take a bunch of them out, even though we only want someone to take one. The dispensers we're manufacturing are to kind of a take one only kind of dispensary. So I think we'll hopefully get that solved, but we could sure use your help. If you see it out, if you see something, say something, let us know, and we'll get that to our maintenance team if our normal practices don't catch it. So hopefully the new dispensers will stop the run on, on them.
Thank you, Doug. Another question has come in, and this one is about the Southwest Corridor project. And the question is, how will OHSU and PCC Sylvania be served by Southwest Corridor? And basically their question was about what connections are going to be made for stops between those two facilities, which are not exactly on the line itself.
Yeah, let me try on that one. So I think they're two separate solutions. They're intended to be at PCC Sylvania campus. Frankly, originally it was looked at, I know PCC Sylvania was looking for, could we do the rail line right through there? Well, I think it was pretty quickly the economics, tunneling through there was very expensive. The option we've landed on would be a shuttle, a dedicated shuttle system that TriMet PCC Sylvania will work through. Personally, I think it's a great candidate longer term because these are years out for potentially an autonomous shuttle up there at some point. I think it could be really, really cool. And I think the community would really receive it well. So we'll see where we go, but there'll be a shuttle of some kind to come. Secondly, moving up to the Gibbs station, I think that's called, if I remember on the line. So that's a long hike all the way from Barber all the way up to OHSU to the campus up there. So what we have agreed to is it's going to be something called a funicular elevator. So take an elevator. We looked at the options, stand it straight up. That was one of the backup options, was to go straight up and then have a bridge across over to the campus and to connect into the campus. But where we've just been honing the cost behind the scenes is take the elevator, lay it down on the terrain, and it actually pulls you up the terrain in a very complex platform. There are a number of them, so it's kind of a cube that pulls you up sideways on a diagonal basis, if you will. So pretty cool. We don't have one here in this region. There's a few in the world, a number of them in the world. And I know there's some overseas in Europe. There's one in Canada, in Edmonton, Alberta. There's a few others around. So that's what we're pursuing, and be able to handle the capacities that we'll be taking as those Envision 2 trains coming in, probably pretty close together with a lot of capacity is through all the people going up and down. So I think it's pretty exciting if we can pull this off.
It is. I think people really love to say the word funicular.
Well, I need help, as you can tell.
All right. So here is our next question, and this is also about masks on vehicles. Is there a way for the masks to be dispensed one at a time?
Well, that is a great question, and that's what we're hoping that to the design of the containers we're looking at, that it's not only a please, we're asking you to take one, that it's almost you're only allowed to take one. So I'm not sure what the designers have come up with, but it is supposed to be a take one only, and hopefully through everybody else wanting to board the bus, it'll be pretty obvious if someone's trying to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 versus just take your one and move on. So that's part of the delay in the design, is we're trying to get to take one only approach of dispensary.
Thank you, Doug.
We totally agree with you, because it's a lot of litter around. It's not healthy for the environment to have all this litter around. It takes a lot of time to clean it up. Take what you need, but leave the rest for everybody else.
That's true. I do see a lot of the disposable masks disposed of, but not in trash cans. So thank you for answering that one. There was one comment that came back about the talk about the funicular service, and basically just said that funicular would be a super cool, and I totally agree with the automated shuttle to PCC. So thank you. All right.
Well, we said in our business plan, just so you know, the agency, and it's a big step. We're exploring in different ways, willing to look at driverless technology here. I was fortunate in the past place I worked, drive the largest driverless train system in the world. No drivers on it. Every 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 50 seconds, there's a train coming. So it's possible, it's coming. I think we're going to see this more and more over time in this region. And I think it's potentially very exciting, but we've got to do it right.
Thank you, Doug. So the next question is about our elevator system. And they're asking, within the budget, is there any money for improvement to our elevators?
The answer is absolutely yes, there are. In fact, we've been working on, Dee's going to correct me here, but I think we have about a 3-year program of upgrading our oldest and worst performing elevators. Frankly, it was pretty evident to me. 5 years. Dee's, there we go. I knew the correction was. So it's a 5-year program. My apologies, not a 3-year program. We have some very old, well-used elevators that are well past their prime. So we are already underway right now, even starting last year, of a full retrofit on many of our elevators of the system, i.e. Washington, the Washington Tunnel by the zoo is an example of a really big one. So in fact, I'm seeing a lot less notifications personally on failed elevators now. We're really getting at the worst and working our way back up.
Thank you, Doug. I don't see any other questions coming in. So if you do have more questions, please use the chat feature and send your questions directly to me, Clay Thompson, and we will get them answered for you. We may have another one coming in. And our question is, just one MAX train, not two hooked together, be run during these low capacity time for savings?
Ah,
Single
well,
car.
that's a great comment. We have like most organizations, you have different versions of fleets when you buy your train cars. And TriMet is no exception. So our first generation cars, they're Bombardier cars. We have 26 of them. We're getting rid of those, and you can't do much with them. They're the ones that are not ADA compliant. They have the higher floors when you have to step upstairs to get on them. So we're in the process of replacing those. The rest of our fleet, there's a mixture where some, when we purchase them, were designed to be run as singles. I'll call them a single versus a two-car joined. There are many others that are not. So whenever we can, we do try and run single cars based on what demand looks like. The next generation car we're bringing in, we're calling the Type 6s. It's about $150 million to replace these old Type 1s. They are all going to have the capability to be running that way. So I think we made some economic choices, not wrong, just for the time, that did not allow some of that disconnecting. And so the goal is to get to more yield management in the future. And the next generation cars, I think there's 33 coming, including the red lines plus ones, will have that capability. We're going to do more and more and more to that basis for the fleet. So it's
Thank you, Doug. And the next question is about the Washington Park Tunnel Station. And they're asking, are there any upgrades coming to the Washington Park Tunnel Station? And we're actually working up there right now, I believe.
They are there. If they're not finished, I know they're right in the thick of it there at some point. I don't know the status of it, but there were some upgrades that were going on there.
That's correct. Okay, and so our next question. What are the plans for the closed stations, particularly at the mall?
Well, nothing like a good plan that has a wrench thrown at it, being COVID. So just this last round February, March range, we closed about 3 of the stations, like Kings Hill Salmon and the 4th Yamhill and Morrison station. So part of the objective was to monitor what the performance actually looked like in actual usage and impact. So my intention is to come back to the board next year. I'm going to probably have to push that out because I don't think we have a real measure going on in this environment to what before and after might look like. So the intention is to close those stations and permanently, and but we want to see, particularly the Kings Hill Salmon one is what I've indicated, to come back to the board just over a year from now. But I'm gonna guess it's about a year and a half from now. But that's the intent.
Thank you, Doug. And I haven't seen any other questions come in this evening. So again, if you do have any more questions, please use the chat feature and email and send them directly to me, to Clay Thompson. Make sure we get them answered. We have another one coming in. Let's take a look at this one. And so, can TriMet remove a station in Lloyd? We're talking about the Lloyd district. They have 3 stations there within a few feet of each other.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I wanted to look at the first batch downtown. Those are pretty obvious ones. And frankly, the other one that's still on, I'll call the review list, is Skidmore. So I said, bring that one back in a few years to have a look at. But we want to see the ridership increase. As it relates to the Rose Quarter one, yes, I think there could be an extra station here. But there's also been some recent investment there, hotels and other such things. So I think we want to let the area continue and develop. So I'll call it, it's on the watch list. but it's really critical. There's great access to the convention center. I think that's really, really important. And so, that one of those is would be on the watch list for me.
Thank you, Doug. We do have some kudos coming in. One that said, thank you for almost seamlessly having buses cover MAX trains during all the protests. Well done.
Well, I think the comment I wouldn't mind adding to this one is I want to apologize. We wish we were providing seamless service, particularly around Pioneer Square, where all our trains cross and much of our buses on the bus mall go. We are going to default to being safe for our staff and our customers. The protests are wonderful, but we have to be careful for crowd control. When you're moving live trains through here and buses, safety is first and paramount for us. And so sometimes we have to pull back because of damage to the vehicles, damage to the public. You don't know where it's going to go. So we try and ebb and flow that as best we can. So I do want to apologize when you have to pull back, where our customers may have to get to Goose Hollow, to Rose Quarter, or to other key spots. But we're doing it only because of safety. So I apologize, but that's the reason. And I'd rather default there and again get you home safe. So.
Thank you, Doug. So our next question is asking, can TriMet offer Wi-Fi service for increased connectivity on buses, light rail, and at transit facilities?
The answer is yes. This is on our radar screen of possibilities right now. So there has been a number of discussions behind the scenes. We've hit the pause button of looking at this, and I can't get into some details right now, but not looking at it right now because of the current environment. But I really do believe it's something that it helps bring value to our customers as part of what I call, how does TriMet re-attract riders back? Wi-Fi for me is one of them. I'm hoping as our third-party investments that can actually help us get there and bring really high value to you. So we've been working on that one to be honest, for about a year in conversations. So, but there's some other things that have to happen. And I'm in hopes that hopefully we can get there at some point. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Doug. And it looks like that was our last question for the evening. And so, Doug, do you have any final comments for us?
Well, I don't know if I know President Warner's here. I don't know if there's anything he wanted to say, and I may have a couple comments after him. But just very pleased that he and Director Simmons are here tonight.
Thank you, Doug. Again, this is Bruce Warner. I just want to thank everybody for participating this evening. I did see one chat where one person was concerned it took them 5 minutes to get onto the chat, but we're all working on this in a way to allow folks to provide us the input on the budget and give us their comments. We need to take action on a budget. I believe we're going to try to do it on a regular meeting on June 24th. And we'll take into consideration the comments and thoughts that were brought here today. And I would point out that we'd love to hear more. We get comments and emails from folks on a regular basis. So if you have further comments, please let us know. It is our intent to take the action and consistent with our values and mission. And I think I want to commend the staff, Doug and all of your staff, for the great work you did putting the changes of this budget together in such a quick way and really being thoughtful in the changes that were there. So I think I'll stop there, but I know Linda and I both appreciate it. So maybe Linda has some thoughts too.
I just want to thank everyone like you did, Bruce, for joining us and taking an interest in how TriMet is addressing the decline in revenue and the service needs of the community, and also in terms of how we're looking at the future. And each day it provides us with some new insight. So thanks for joining us tonight. And as Bruce said, keep the information and your views coming. We do listen to it. We can't always respond to it the way you want, but we value people's interest in how we can provide the best service possible for the region. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. I think we will close off now. What I can say, having worked in other transit agencies for years, is there's a great base here, folks. and I've had the privilege of working around the world in many transit agencies, and there's a great base here. We have much to learn. We need your help. Everyone has ownership, and I call TriMet Nation, and help us continue to evolve. We know we don't have all the answers, but I'll tell you, it's sure not because we're not trying. But we need you to help us calibrate, and if we get it right, that's wonderful. But we also know we also don't always get it right. But that's part of being human and trying. So thank you for helping us, and please keep the dialogue open. This shouldn't be the only time we check in. There's many avenues or people you may run into, and John Gardner's great work, or Tom Mills' great work, or others. Use those avenues to keep the pulse open. Let's not wait for events just like this. So having said that, thank you for your time tonight. Please, if you're going to be protesting, that's wonderful, but please be safe. Please make sure you do your social distancing as well. We don't want passengers who are sick. We want healthy customers in a healthy region. So thank you and good night.
Thank you, Doug, and just thanks to everyone for joining us. If you have any questions that you still want to ask, again, you can email us at comments@trimet.org. And any questions that weren't answered this evening, we'll be sure to get back to you after this program is over. And all of our information, again, is at trimet.org/open house. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great night.